Yeah, it's definitely a sad day around here at New England Wildlife Centers, but appreciate the ability to share the story and hopefully have a broader impact.
Give us a chronology of events there at the Wildlife Center, starting with this week, starting with MK's admission into your facility.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess it was a couple days ago. We got word that MK was down on the ground. She was captured by some local folks and brought to our facility. On intake, by the time she got to us, she was spent. She was in really rough shape. Too weak to stand. Really too weak to even lift her head. Um, and so, we immediately set to work trying to stabilize her vitals and get her hydrated, and at the same time, run some diagnostics so we could get a true picture of what was going on. Obviously, rodenticide was on everybody's mind, but in the wildlife world, there's so many things that can cause problems. We had to be sure. So we did our in-house clotting test as well as a sort of a slew of other diagnostic and um, laboratory tests that we could do in-house, and it started to look very strongly to us like it was rodenticide toxicity. And we have also sent out some additional lab tests that'll confirm that with the types of substances and amounts. But based on all the physical symptoms, the fact that she had good fat stores on her, the fact that her red blood cell count was so low, the fact that her PCV was so low, really indicated to us that we're probably dealing with anti-coagulant rodenticide toxicity. And so, she was in our care for, I think, probably 36 hours. We were with her every step of the way. We actually had a vet member stay overnight with her the first night, and then last evening we were sort of figuring out later in the evening who was going to take what shifts and how we could all make sure she had what she needed. And she was still in that really rough shape, and just still breathing, but still too weak, and really hadn't shown much improvement. So we were really hopeful that the treatments were going to start having a greater effect, but it was pretty clear that the condition she arrived in, and whatever dose of poison and whatever background issues she had were just really critical and really serious. And so essentially, well, our whole vet team was right there. She unfortunately coughed up some blood, and our vet team set to work right away. Cleared the airway, was able to intubate her to give oxygen, was able to give emergency drugs to help the cardiovascular system. But unfortunately, it still wasn't enough, and she kind of slipped away from us. At which point they did some, they try to do compressions the best you can on a bird because they obviously have a breastplate, but it can occasionally work, but it was to no avail. And unfortunately, we lost MK. But we do take some solace in the fact that it's a horrible way to go. Obviously, if you don't have enough oxygen flowing to your muscles and tissues, and you can't get nutrients around, and especially to your brain, it's not a comfortable place to be. So we are happy that she's at peace, and we're really hoping that even though the story is a tragedy, it'll help shed a little light on what SGARS can do, not just to an individual animal, but really to a community based on how many people loved her.
Yeah, we had some wildlife enthusiasts look inside her mouth when they were carrying her from the cemetery, and I could hear on the audio they said that her mouth was pale, which is one of the signs. And then you say she spit up blood, which is another sign. And you performed earlier this week a blood clotting test on MK.
Yeah, so essentially, pale gums are can be an indication of reduced blood flow, or just indication things aren't going well. The thing we do in our hospital to get a first crack, a real first understanding of what we're dealing with, is we'll do a clotting test, right? And so that's we have to pull blood to do laboratory tests and lead tests and all those other things that eagles may come up against in the environment. But one of the things we do is we time how long it takes the blood to clot out of the body. And now a healthy eagle, I believe, should have clotted in somewhere between 4 and 6 minutes, maybe just longer than that. MK's blood didn't clot after an hour, 2 hours. We actually came in the next morning, and the blood sample was, it still looked like, excuse me, being vulgar, but it still looked like red jello. It had not even begun to clot. And obviously, it's important to know the slow clotting can be caused by a number of different factors. But when we look at that result in conjunction with her physical exam, with the other blood work, and with what we knew about the environment and area she came from, that's what led us to suspect rodenticide so strongly. And we're hoping to have that backed up by laboratory tests in the next day or so.
You were saying it's a slow, painful death. What happens to the body if a raptor ingests a rodent that's been tainted with these toxic poisons?
Yeah, so the same mechanism that would work on a mouse or rat will work on the animal that eats it. And so if you have a rodent that's ingested rat poison, essentially their blood stops clotting. And so they're slow moving and not feeling well, and can essentially be an easy target or an easy lunch for a hawk, an owl, and in this case, an eagle. And so they'll swoop down and they'll make the mouse or rat a meal, um, and they will take in whatever that rodent is ingested and not fully metabolized, and their blood will or start to have trouble clotting too. And then in some cases, I can't confirm that in this one, but in some cases, you'll get the owl or hawk or predator will get sick because their blood's not clotting right, and so they're not hunting efficiently. And so the next rodent they can afford to catch is probably going to be another slow moving one and probably one from the same area. And so you see the cycle of them sort of dosing themselves, not feeling well, and then redosing themselves because that's all they can afford to do when they're not feeling well. And so, yeah, essentially the other thing we're seeing is, they can have this stuff on board and still sort of function, but it turns something like a bump or a bruise or something that a normal healthy bird would recover from into a catastrophic event, right? Because if your blood is naturally, body's naturally clotting and you get bruised really bad, for an animal that doesn't have the ability, it can, cause pretty severe bleeding, whether it's internal or external.
Do you see, and I asked this question earlier this week, but just for an update, do you see a disproportionate number of raptors coming into your facility from Arlington laced with SGARS?
So, we do treat a fair number of patients from downtown, and we do get patients from Arlington. Unfortunately, any urban area, especially around the city of Boston, is where we get a lot of patients from. We see this problem, and we get probably between 50 and 200 cases a year in our hospitals, and it's truly unfortunate. I mean, anywhere you have a lot of people densely settled, they're going to be mice and rats. And so there are things folks can do in their own homes. You can make good individual choices. So you can tell your pest control company not to use the SGARS. But there are also things that can be done on the municipal and state level. And, we were really encouraged to hear the steps Arlington has taken recently to curtail the use in town. And right now, especially on the heels of this case, we're really focused on having some state level legislation go through that will improve reporting and help us understand what the problem is so that we can, sort of march forward with the fight to ban this stuff.
You see all kinds of cases, I'm sure, at the New England Wildlife Center. How aggravating is it for you, being the CEO of that center, seeing these creatures, these majestic creatures coming into your facility, horribly sick, when it can be avoided since we have so many other holistic alternatives to get rid of the rodents, and especially the raptors being probably arguably the best, better than any black box could ever be? How aggravating is that for you?
It's incredibly aggravating and more so heartbreaking. It's just sad to see, week in, week out, we take in these patients and they can be bleeding from the nose and eyes and mouth, and you can just see the discomfort. And to know that it can be avoided by folks, really, it's about public education. So many of the folks, even sharing this case, are coming back and saying, "Oh my goodness, I had no idea that these poisons have this effect." And so by knowing that it's so attainable to make a change, it can be really aggravating. And I need to shout out our veterinary team because, I'm the CEO and I get to oversee stuff, but those folks are really the hardworking people that are, literally a few times a week in some cases are taking in these animals and putting the hours of care into their case and watching this stuff up close. And, it never gets easier. And I don't think it should. If you're in this field and things don't break your heart when they happen like this, then you're probably not doing the right job. So I'm truly grateful to them, and I'm truly grateful to everyone who's written in and to support MK and this work and hopefully this legislation too.
Yeah, Arlington has pretty much prohibited the use of these black boxes, SGARs, around any town buildings. Obviously, private homes, private businesses can still use this. It's got to be aggravating to know that there are alternatives out there. But at the same token, it seems like people are dragging their feet on this. It almost seems like a no-brainer.
And it's not an uncommon theme. We need to work with nature, instead of in contrast to it. And so if you're doing rodent control using those holistic methods or using snap traps or the IPM strategies, we know work, while also maintaining a healthy populations of raptors and fox and coyote in your backyard. The results will be magnified. You'll have a greater effect on rodent populations and help not only keep yourself and your family safe, but also your pets safe too, because these poisons, they can get into them as well. And so, yeah, we need to work in concert with the natural controls that are already out there. And it just goes to show in this case how big a loss a single animal can have. And I will say, one owl, we actually tracked this, and in the 9 months or 10 months it was with us, ate over 2,000 mice. So that's a good example of what a dent they can really make if you just let them be out there and stay healthy. And if you're going to do one thing in your own backyard to try to help wildlife, making sure you're not using these poisons is a good place to start.
From what I understand, when MK was seen in the cemetery, pretty much grounded, could not take flight, get back to the nest. People were saying that KZ, the male mate, was circling overhead, obviously concerned for their lifelong mates, correct?
I believe so.
But
Yeah,
like, what does KZ do now? Just given your expertise on raptor behavior.
it's a little hard to say what KZ will do next. I'm no eagle expert, but my understanding is that they can take a new mate, but I think it's an indeterminate amount of time before KZ is ready to do that. And it sounds like these two, they're folks that followed them, long before I was even tuned into their case, that knew their parents and knew where they hatched. And it sounds like these two have been bonded for a while. So I'm sure it's a hard thing he's going through, and probably wondering where she is right now.